Greed can topple the humble as easily as it topples the mighty. That's exactly what happened to Sister Mary Margaret Kreuper and Sister Lana Chang, two California nuns who were looking to cash in before their retirement. The two high-rolling Sisters of Mercy pled guilty in June of 2021 to embezzling Catholic school funds to fuel their gambling endeavors. But what could have led them down such a path? How did their vow of poverty turn into an $800,000 embezzlement scheme? These ladies gave their whole lives to the church. What could have led them to steal from it? For that answer, let's first look at the temptation in front of them. Kreuper became a nun at the young age of 18, joining the Sisters of St. Joseph. Chang was also a member of the order. In 1990, Kreuper became the principal of St. James Catholic School in Torrance, California. The school itself is a well-known institution with a tuition fee to match its popularity. It costs around $6,000 annually for one child, $11,000 for two, and $16,000 for three. So send your kids in bulk and save $2,000. St. James goes K-8. To put one child through the entire school would cost you $54,000 over 9 years. Send 3 kids, and it jumps to $162,000. If you consider the 318 kids in attendance, St. James pulls in roughly $1.9 million a year. Kreuper was in charge of every single penny. As for Sister Chang, she was an 8th grade teacher and had been for 20 years. You may be asking yourself, how can two people swipe so much money without anybody batting an eye? Well, the answer is a 3-parter. Kreuper's job as principal gave her unsupervised access to all the checks from student tuition, donations, and fees. Before sending them off to bookkeeping, she'd stash a few in secret and deposit them into a separate account. At the time, the church had 2 bank accounts. One was for St. James Catholic, the school. The other was for St. James Convent, a nunnery, and was meant to cover the living expenses of the nuns. However, the convent account had been abandoned for years. Kreuper and Chang were the only ones old enough to know about it. Because the checks passed through Kreuper before making it to bookkeeping, she could withhold a few and deposit them into the abandoned account. Since no one knew the account was still active, the nuns figured they could use it as their personal piggy bank. Secondly, the school's financial state allowed the two to go undetected. From what's reported, it seems as though the school was generally in the black financially, so no one noticed the changes in the books. However, this was because Kreuper would routinely lie about the school's finances. She assured the administration that the school was doing just fine, while, at the same time, telling parents and teachers that they were operating on a shoestring budget. Finally, who in their right mind would suspect 2 nuns on the verge of retirement from being involved in such an elaborate scheme? Maybe these 2 nuns should have raised a few eyebrows, especially with their love for Las Vegas. A normal nun could probably do a lot of good with $800,000. They could donate it to charity, fix up their community, or recycle it into the school. Instead, Kreuper and Chang decided to try their luck in the casinos. It was actually well known throughout their community that the ladies took frequent vacations to Vegas. It wasn't something they hid, and when questioned about how they funded their Vegas life, they said it was money given to them by a rich uncle. No one ever considered that these 2 women of the cloth were pulling money from the school's budget. Gambling is looked down upon and seen as sinful in the Catholic Church. However, they don't see it as a horrendous act, as many of their parishioners still partake in the vices of civilian life. Basically, you're not going to get kicked out of the priesthood for playing some poker. The church believes it's more important to focus on the situation in which the vice takes place. These 2 gambling gals were definitely living in sin by stealing from the school itself. So, what exactly is the church's stance on gambling? The different Catholic sects seem to argue on what the right idea is. Take a look at the Protestants. For instance, they believe that gambling is a sin no matter what. Reverend Andrew Fowler, executive secretary of the Committee of 100 Ministers, was quoted as saying, "Gambling is immoral because the gambler is trying to enrich himself by a skill that is unproductive." He goes on to say, God warns us to flee from and resist the gods who preside over all matters in which chance is concerned. Reverend Michael Griffin of Catholic University seemed much less worried about gambling. He opposed Fowler's view by saying, it is neither good nor bad. It becomes good or bad according to the moral circumstances that surround the act of gambling. Griffin seemed to be touching on the idea that your gambling is only a problem if you're neglecting your normal duties in life. If you're gambling for pleasure, there's nothing wrong with it. But if you're stealing private school funds to fuel your gambling addiction, you should probably go to confession. There aren't many certainties in life, but you can always count on a long-running scam to fall apart. For Kreuper and Chang, their scheme crumbled as they had one foot out the door. Kreuper and Chang went for years without making a mistake. They just kept moving along with their plan, taking check after check to fund their lifestyle. However, neither lady ever considered the question, what would happen when they retire? When a new principal is appointed, the church performs an audit. There were about to be quite a few eyes on Kreuper's records. The audit isn't meant to dig up dirt on the previous principal. It's a system in place to make sure the new principal knows what they're getting themselves into. The school wants to make sure all of its money and financials are in line before handing the keys over to a new leader. However, the audit uncovered the missing money and an internal investigation was launched. As if the audit wasn't bad enough, a family reached out to Kreuper and requested a copy of a check they'd sent in. A check which she deposited into the secret account. It's reported that Kreuper became very nervous during this time, and while it's not surprising that someone under audit would be worried, it did raise some suspicions. Those close to her attest to her odd behavior. She ordered St. James employees to alter and destroy financial records during the audit. Once this behavior started, Monsignor Michael Myers reported her to the internal investigators. He told them he felt like something was off. The archdiocese hired an independent auditor and a retired FBI agent for a deeper and more thorough look. Both worked to investigate and interview all the people involved, including the culprits. There was even a tip called into a hotline for the archdiocese about the scheme. Ultimately, it seemed like the pair were destined to be caught. Once everything was out in the open, it was clear what happened to all the missing money, and the parents were furious. Now, you'd think that stealing all that money for years would be a one-way ticket to jail, but most religious people are known for their forgiveness. The church decided not to press criminal charges after learning that the Sisters of St. Joseph were willing to pay full restitution. The convent chose to handle Kreuper and Chang internally. They were removed from their ministry and sent to different convents across the country. The church has said that they are implementing new checks and balances to keep anything like this from happening again. The new principal, Noreen Maricic, has put forth a new online payment system that gives people more control and allows a running record to be kept. The church seems to understand its fault in this and is doing what it can to fix the whole situation. The decision not to press charges on Kreuper or Chang was a controversial one. Many were upset with the church officials for many reasons, while others believed that forgiveness was the correct response. Some angry parents believed the nuns were getting preferential treatment. They argued that if these two were normal women, they'd be in jail. To make matters worse, parents of St. James students were upset that the church had kept information from them. The church found itself in hot water for not disclosing the total dollar amount stolen from the school. They even claimed that the stolen money did not affect the students' education. Parents were furious to read that in the letter they received. Some called for Monsignor Myers to resign. How could losing $800,000 not have any effect on the students' education? The teachers of St. James were the ones with a real thorn in their side. They were denied raises for years because, according to Sister Kreuper, the school could not afford it. Parents and teachers alike wanted the restitution money to pay staff members and upgrade the outdoor eating area. Jack Alexander, a St. James parent, was quoted as saying, "We were an ATM and people know it, and they won't ask for justice." He went on to say that letting them off because the money was repaid sends a message that money is more important than morals. He doesn't believe that is the correct message to send their children. Many parents considered banding together and pressing charges themselves. However, their case will most likely fall flat without cooperation from the archdiocese. Even though the church did not press charges, the state refused to let the sisters get away untouched. Mary Kreuper pled guilty to wire fraud and money laundering as evidence began to pile up before her. If she took the case to court, she faced up to 40 years in prison if found guilty. Taking the plea deal was a no-brainer. She admitted to embezzling the money, spending it on personal matters, credit cards, and substantial gambling debts. Her attorneys claimed that mental illness had a hand in Kreuper's crimes. The disgraced nun has shown remorse for her actions, claiming she'd never have done those things in the right state of mind. But with a guilty plea entered, what is the appropriate punishment? Remember, she is a 79-year-old woman. Any long sentence would mean the rest of her life in prison. Maybe house arrest and a hefty fine are in order? Perhaps court-ordered community service would right her $800,000 wrong? We are not sure what punishment fits the crime, but there are definitely alternatives to consider. As of right now, her fate is unknown. She can only pray as to what might happen. As the ringleader, Sister Kreuper is the center of information related to the case. Sister Chang will likely see her day in court, but only time will tell if the 8th grade teacher walks away from it all. Click here to watch one of these next videos.